Well, the US women's national team ensured that they will indeed walk away from Tokyo Olympics with a medal, a bronze medal in their bronze medal match. Of course, a 4-3 win actually ended up being over Australia, the Matildas. Kathleen McNamee, as per usual, is always joining me to look back on this one. Kathleen, now going into this one, I know that both sides were probably feeling a bit of disappointment on missing out on the gold medal match. So I was almost expecting a bit of a cagey affair, given the fact that we weren't quite sure where the US stood, and then we had seen some real improvements and some momentum with Australia. But it ended up being a 7-goal thriller, I suppose, if you want to call it that. Your thoughts on the game, and if the scoreline reflected what you saw in the game?
Yeah, this match was just the two teams absolutely going for it. I think it was the loosest I've seen both of them play. Defense went out the window for both sides for the whole thing. And it just seemed to be a bit of a goal fest. Like, I think it's interesting for so much after the US women's national team lost out on the gold medal race. There was this whole talk about should Andonovski have brought maybe some more young players through. I know Julie Foudy was talking about that on ESPN and saying, like, why maybe weren't players like McCarri or even some of the ones that weren't on the Olympic roster given a better chance. So it's kind of funny that, again, today, the two players that came out were Megan Rapinoe and Carli Lloyd. Possibly the last time we'll see either of them at Olympics. Who knows? Carli Lloyd, most definitely, you would think. And they were the ones that managed to get the goals for the US women's national team. So I think that was a bit of a shout out to say, you know, don't count us out just yet. We're still here. A record-breaking night for Carli Lloyd, of course, second most appearances in the US women's national team and the most Olympic goals for the US women's national team in their history. So she definitely seemed to feel like she had something to prove. But I don't know if things were necessarily answered for the US women's national team with that match. I think Australia really put it up to them. I think it was disappointing that Ellie Carpenter got that red card in the last match, because I think she really could have made the difference for them today. I mean, Megan Rapinoe's second goal was handed to her on a plate, and the third one was also another defensive error from Alana Kennedy, who had a kind of unfortunate time in the defense. So I think it's going to be interesting in the lead up to the World Cup. You know, the European teams have stuff like the Euros next summer to kind of get themselves through. These teams don't have as much. And I think there's going to be a lot of questions left to ask, but they have a bronze medal. At least they're going home with something. I would think there would have been a lot more people at risk if they hadn't have brought that medal home. But if it wasn't for Sam Kerr's glancing header hitting the post in that second half, we could have very easily have seen this match go to extra time. And I'm kind of sad it didn't, because I was really enjoying it. It was a lot of fun to watch.
It was fun to watch indeed. And I mean, as you said, at least a lot more questions would have been asked, you know, had they got home completely empty-handed. It is a bit tough for the Matildas, but we'll get to them in a bit. Sticking with the US, it is a bronze medal. And the way things were going, we did expect them to get the gold nonetheless. End of story, with all due respect to everybody else in this competition. But with the bronze medal, would you say then that this campaign, could you even call it a failure for the US women's national team? Not just because they ended up with a bronze medal, which is still something, but I suppose, you know, having that massive unbeaten streak broken as well. And then the fact that they've left this tournament now with more questions being asked of them than us having the answers to.
Yeah, it's hard. I think it's always hard to class an Olympic bronze medal as a failure, because at the end of the day, that is an achievement. In the context of this team, I was actually kind of surprised at how much they were celebrating at full time today. I thought they would have been a little bit more, obviously excited, but also reflective on maybe what happened. And for a team that we're so used to seeing talking about winning and winning mentality and how they don't want anything but the best, it's been a bit of a shift. But maybe that is just a shift that the team are coming to naturally and are kind of accepting that they can't be the sort of behemoth that they have been of women's football anymore, because these nations like Australia are starting to put so much money into their programs and they're reaping the rewards of it. I think over this tournament, Australia have like absolutely smashed all their viewing records in terms of actually people getting out to watch the team and stuff like that. It shows a massive success for them. I think that if anything, more than it being a failure, it probably shows that the US women's national team is at a period in their progress where they are transitioning a lot, and they're going to have to maybe make those hard changes. I know, like, even before, when the rosters were called, there was a lot of talk about the fact that players like Ashlyn Harris weren't called up. the sort of experience that she has. And people were saying, well, maybe that shows that we're kind of moving it along from that generation of US players. So I think it'll really, if Andonovski and the team go on from this and don't see that they need to bring in those younger players, the likes of Macario, or even players like Lynn Williams, like incredible, if they're not given the sort of chances in the next few months, I think you would probably look at this and say, well, yeah, it is a bit of a failure because you didn't learn anything from what you saw. But if they start to develop more, and if they do start to bring in those players, then I think at least they'll be able to reflect on this competition and say, okay, well, we learned something and we are better prepared going into that World Cup cycle.
And one of the beautiful things about the Olympics is that people that probably may not normally watch these teams or watch sports a lot tune in to see. So for those, I suppose, in the USA now, tuning in, expecting big things from this US women's national team, not necessarily getting it in terms of a gold medal, and hearing you now talk about transitioning and probably having to think of times without the likes of Ashlyn Harris and Megan Rapinoe and Carli Lloyd. I suppose, what would you say that the future now is looking on, or the next step? The conveyor belt is still, churning out these stars for this US women's national team, right?
Completely. And even if you look at the NWSL season that's been ongoing while the Olympics have been happening, there's been some incredible young players showing, while these big stars are off in the Olympics, what they can do. I think that for the next camp, it would be really great to see more of those young players come through, players like Pugh, Rodman, like Macario has been involved in the team a lot, but didn't really get a chance to show it during the Olympics. I think showing those sort of players that you put the trust in them, and also giving them the time to work with the players like Rapinoe and Lloyd and Heath and all of those while they're still there, and to gain that experience from them. Obviously, a lot of them are teammates in different contexts and club or whatever it might be. But I think just instilling that sort of US women's national team mentality in those younger players. And that's the thing that's always been great about the US, is that they always have had this conveyor belt of players, and they've always been, and I don't think this is necessarily a sign that that's slowing down in any way. I think the difference is that other teams are catching up rather than them necessarily backing. And that's going to be something that they're going to have to deal with in the next couple of years, is how do they switch their mentality from going into tournaments like this and expecting to win and expecting to be the top, to going in and saying, okay, well, actually, there are about 4 or 5 other teams here who could beat us quite comfortably, and how do we adapt to that, and how do we deal with that?
Well, thank you very much for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app, and for live streaming, premium content, and let's not forget as well, ESPN FC 7 days a week. Subscribe to ESPN Plus.